The content you are about to ingest is for mature audiences only. Human written, voiced by AI. Welcome to Bella Vita, Tales of Sidori Island Part 1. Trigger warnings such as cheating, dubious consent, BDSM, secret society, abduction, female revenge, mild torture, and many other kinks and fetishes may occur throughout the story. If you aren't into weird shit, you reserve the option to press stop at any time. If you like weird shit and wish to continue, sit back, do nothing, and enjoy. Episode 3. Shady Joe's Convenience Store Part 1.
It had been about 25 years since someone recognized 44-year-old Joanne St. from her previous line of work. At one point in time, the name Joanne St. would be trending across households. For an entire year, she was on track and predicted to be the next big actress to emerge to stardom, until one day she vanished from the public eye. There weren't any scandals or salacious rumors regarding her or her behavior. In the moment, from a consumer's point of view, it's as if she didn't want the spotlight. But that wasn't the case. She chose a different path. Everyone knows her now as JoJo St. Clair, founder and CEO of Shady Joe's Convenience Store, one of the largest convenience store companies to ever exist. One day she's a fictional character winning Best Supporting Actress in her debut on the big screen. And the next day she vanishes and re-emerges years later as a real-life character worth billions of dollars. With her success, hate was sure to follow. A moderate community of people believe she lives up to her store brand and motto, "Here at Shady Joe's we can afford to not raise our prices, but don't ask us how." They believe her shady activities and business practices allow her to be as successful as she is.
Dan Hoff has been a director in the film industry for 42 years, almost as long as JoJo has been alive. He directed JoJo's debut film, Nothing Left on the Table. JoJo played 18-year-old Rebecca, a girl whose mother passes away while she is finishing her last year of high school. Instead of going into foster care, she met an older gentleman who took care of her in exchange for services. The film had mixed reviews due to its edgy content, but the critics could not deny JoJo's acting ability. Dan Hoff's controversial film would go on to win Best Independent Film. Added with JoJo's Best Supporting Actress award, he quickly rose to the top of the class in filmmaking. For the past 11 years he has had part in a box office #1 every year. Unlike how people perceived JoJo's success, Dan's semblance of a squeaky clean image allowed him to be championed without much discourse. In real-life society saw Dan as a saint, but on film, his profanity-laced, near-pornographic films begged to tell a tale of someone completely different. An up-and-coming blogger who goes by the name D. Taylor coined the phrase, "rage artist," to describe who Dan was in real life, versus the type of art he produced. She defines rage art as a type of art that an artist expresses their innermost inhibitions. Her blog site, The Truth is in the Details, plays on her name and the information within the gossip. It's ranked #6 on the top 10 entertainment blogs. Dan's influence in the rage art genre has allowed people to feel comfortable using art as expression rather than living out their feelings. Rage art has thinned the line between artistic expression and artistic corruption. Dan remains unscathed from accusations of influence regarding the misuse of people's artistic expressions.
JoJo was 19 when she starred in Dan's film. Dan was 37. Dan was very professional on set. When it was time for JoJo's nude scene, Dan made sure all proper protocols were followed and the actors and actresses felt safe. Some of his cast would sign sexual consent forms for sex scenes to add a sense of realism to his films. JoJo's nude scene didn't call for consent, it needed her perky 34B breast to be visible on screen. The viewers saw, enjoyed, and she won an award for her role. It wasn't the award for her role that changed her. On the night she received the award, is the same night she wished she could give it back.
After parties were going on all across the city, entertainment industry cliques were getting together to celebrate as usual after an award show. All of the celebrities would be in attendance. Everyone from actors, actresses, models, musicians, athletes, fashion designers, groupies, and escorts, the list goes on. Dan was so excited about his and JoJo's win, he decides to throw a party at an estate he was renting. Stoked about his nomination, He splurged on the rental unit and adult party favors in hope of experiencing the moment he was experiencing after his victory. His adult party favors consist of alcohol, drugs, a DJ, stripper poles, and anything else he felt his guest would enjoy. He invites all of his industry friends, the cast, crew and anyone he could think of, for a life-changing experience.
JoJo was new to the entertainment culture. She had been to parties before, but nothing compared to the 12-bedroom party house where Dan was hosting his. Dan told her he was having a party win or lose, so she should be prepared. JoJo was a natural bombshell. She was built like a 5 feet 8 inches supermodel with blonde hair, blue eyes, long legs, smooth skin, cute ass and perfect tits, while cosplaying as the girl next door. Beyond dressing up for all of the purple carpet events and movie premieres, her everyday attire of a cute top, jean skirt and sneakers would be her attire for the party. Her ride drops her off at the party about 45 minutes after guests started to arrive. She is still wearing the dress she had worn to the awards ceremony and needed to change. As JoJo enters the house with her duffel bag, she is in immediate shock. Seductive music is blaring through the speakers as she stands in the foyer scanning the area. A thin layer of smoke hovered across the room under her nostrils, triggering a memory of the first time she tried weed when she was 12. Party guests are walking from room to room. She identifies some recognizable faces from the entertainment industry, and by some of their stares, she is recognizable to them. 2 minutes pass, she gathers her bearings for her next move. A random guy presenting himself to be under the influence stares at her cleavage and comments on how he can recognize her tits from anywhere. JoJo gives him the finger as she exits the foyer in an attempt to find Dan. He's one of the few people she has connected with within the industry and feels most comfortable around him. She enters the living room and it's pandemonium. People are everywhere. Chris Fontana and Julie Taggart from the Chris and Julie Morning Show are doing lines of cocaine on the coffee table. Next to the lines of cocaine is her naked co-star, Mandy Somerville, getting eaten out by famous rapper Lil Sweat. JoJo thought to herself, Mandy took the movie title, nothing left on the table, way too literal. The experience was a culture shock for JoJo. She grew up an only child with her single mother in a 2-bedroom apartment just outside of the city. After she scours the room for 4 minutes with Dan nowhere in sight, JoJo feels if she changes clothes she might not feel as uptight, so she heads upstairs to find a place to change. JoJo arrives at the top of the stairs and hears loud moaning coming from multiple bedrooms. She hurries past a closed door looking for an open room. She walks past the second room and all she can see is a very muscular naked man, about 6 feet 1 inch, sweating and violently thrusting. She hears intermittent smacks and screams coming from the room. She didn't hear anything coming out of the next room. She quietly opens the door and sees 2 women on their knees wearing dog collars attached to chains. A man who JoJo assumed to be over 350 pounds was naked, sitting on the edge holding the chains attached to the women. JoJo apologizes for interrupting and begins to close the door. As the door is closing, she can hear the man offer her a request to join. She ignores him and tells herself if the next room is occupied she will take her things and go home. She had been at the party for about 7 minutes and didn't plan on staying more than an hour. She wanted to show her support for Dan because he gave her an opportunity and he changed her life. The door to the third room JoJo approaches is cracked. The only illumination is the natural light of the moon. She can see the curtains are completely open as she peeks her head around the door to get a better look. The shadow of her updo is casted on the wall. As she slowly begins to open the door, she hears what sounds to be a woman in distress grunting, saying, "Get the fuck off of me." JoJo abruptly pushes open the door, drops her bag, rushes in and shoves the half-naked man to the floor. It's dark, but she can make out the silhouette of a young woman lying on the edge of the bed. Sniffles are heard coming from the young woman as if she had been crying. Without further hesitation, in one swift motion, she takes off her right square heel shoe and starts beating the man in his face and hairy chest. He is still on the floor, frozen in shock. His white dress shirt is open, leaving his dad bod chest exposed to the assault. After JoJo hits him about 6 times, she stands straight up and takes her bare foot and starts kicking and stomping him. He grunts with agony as he uses his arms attempting to protect his upper body and face from the wild kicks. JoJo ignores the man's whimpers and pleas for her to stop while stomps are hitting the naked lower half of his body. The ball of her foot strikes his right thigh twice, and on the third strike to his thigh, her foot slides and hits his cock. He curls up in a ball as he moans. JoJo stops her attack, drops her shoe to the floor, and approaches the young woman, who is now standing in the corner finishing her cries. The moonlight provides more than enough light for JoJo to see mascara running down the young woman's face. She asks the young woman if she is okay. The young woman whimpers yes. JoJo begins to pull down the woman's sparkly dress that was hiked up, making her panties slightly visible. The woman tells JoJo thank you. JoJo grabs the woman by the hand and suggests they get out of there. JoJo picks up her shoe and duffel bag to begin their journey to exit the room. When the young woman is about 2 feet from the man curled up on the floor, she musters up some saliva and spits on him. As the women reach the door, JoJo hears her name being called by the man. Confused as to why this man would be calling her name, she stops and turns around. With the young woman standing at the door, JoJo walks over to the man lying on the floor, repeating her name as he cries. "I'm sorry," JoJo can be heard under his cries. "Dan?" she asks rhetorically as the moon's light revealed his identity. She kneels down in front of him. "What the fuck, Dan?" JoJo asks aggressively. With tears beginning to fall down JoJo's face, she abruptly slaps Dan. In a remorseful tone, Dan agrees he deserves it. JoJo's eyes are still watery as she looks back at the young woman and turns back to Dan, asking what happened. Dan tries to speak, but his crying is making his words hard to understand. The young woman interrupts and says Dan wanted her to do things to him. Rage is building up in JoJo as she balls her fist. The young woman notices JoJo getting ready to punch Dan. She interrupts again, this time with more urgency. In a foreign accent she says, "Wait. He wasn't trying to rape me. He just wanted me to do things to him." JoJo releases her balled fist. In a confused tone, she asks what kind of things. The woman responds, "He wanted me to," and before she can respond, Dan cuts her off and says to JoJo, "I wanted her to do everything you just did to me." JoJo is looking at Dan more confused than ever. Dan reassures JoJo he wasn't trying to hurt the young woman. JoJo replies with an inquiry of what his intention was. Dan sits up with his back against the wall. His moderately hairy chest and right nipple is exposed from his shirt being open. His hands are covering his crotch. He asks JoJo for her trust and if he can show her something without judgment. She nods her head yes. Dan removes his hands from his crotch and JoJo looks down and sees a hard 6-inch cock standing straight up looking at her. Dan embarrassingly says he gets off on being slapped around. Dan says he was trying to make the young woman slap him around when she walked in. JoJo turns to the woman and asks if everything was true. The woman nods her head yes. JoJo grunts with frustration as she tells Dan she wishes she can slap him but she can't, as she points to his dick as a reference as to why she can't. Still in disbelief, JoJo takes a seat on the right side of Dan. JoJo instructs the young woman to stay inside the room and close the door. JoJo informs Dan and the young woman they need to figure out the situation and how to move forward. JoJo asks the young woman her name. The young woman responds Christina. JoJo asks Christina if she wanted to press charges. Christina exclaims she's not mad at Dan and she's not a violent person, so what he was asking she couldn't do. Christina slides down the adjacent wall across from JoJo and Dan and sits down. As Dan is beginning to apologize again, JoJo unexpectedly takes her left hand and drives her fingernails into his thigh and tells him to shut up. Dan winces while Christina jumps in disbelief at JoJo's actions. Dan's cock that was shrinking to 4.5 inches was back at 6 in a matter of seconds. While her nails are still digging into Dan's thigh, JoJo asks Christina how old she is and how she ended up at the party. Christina starts to explain that she is 20 years old and an aspiring model. Her eyes, illuminated by the moon, are beginning to focus onto Dan. JoJo can feel Dan moving. With her eyes still looking at Christina, she releases her grip and pops Dan in his thigh. He lets out a groan. Christina's eyes get big. JoJo turns her head and sees Dan grabbing himself with his left hand. She accidentally grazes the head of his dick as she pops his hand and tells him he's not allowed to touch himself or come. Dan places his hands by his side. JoJo commands Christina to come closer to her and Dan. As Christina is reluctantly moving closer, JoJo tells her to spit on Dan. JoJo's watching Christina slowly crawl to her and Dan. Christina's eyes are fixated on Dan's cock moving up and down with excitement. JoJo grabs hold of Dan's face, squeezing his cheeks while encouraging Christina to spit at his face. Christina takes a small amount of spit that's naturally gathered in her mouth and releases it at Dan's face. Small droplets of the spray hit Dan's face and Jojo's hand. Jojo tells Christina she can do better than that and commands her to do it again. Christina snorts the mucus that was built up from the crying. Between Dan's pre-cum twinkling in the moonlight and the erratic movements of his cock, Jojo's peripherals are occupied as she waits for Christina's redemption spit. Christina spits with every ounce of saliva she has built up and a glob lands right onto Dan's lips. Feeling satiated and excited, he sticks out his tongue and licks his lips as the leftover spit starts to drip onto Jojo's hands. Jojo's grip on Dan's face tightens as she replicates Christina's spitting technique and lands hers onto Dan's cheek. Less than a second went by and Christina lets out a startled scream as she scoots away from Dan, moving closer to Jojo. Jojo looks down at Dan's shaggy pubic region and sees large amounts of cum shooting out of his cock, landing inches away from Christina. Jojo releases her hand from Dan's face and wipes the excess spit onto his shirt as the last few drips are exiting his hole. In a smug, demanding tone, Jojo tells Dan he wasn't allowed to come, so he owes her $1,000 on top of the $5,000 he was going to pay for the experience. Jojo reaches into her bra and grabs her phone. She takes a few full-body pictures of Dan with his chest exposed, dick out, and cum on the floor as he tries to hide his face from the camera flashes. Jojo reiterates he is to send her $4,000 and to send Christina the other $2,000. Dan crawls over towards the nightstand next to the bed. He groans with each crawl. Jojo and Christina remain silent as they watch the moonlight shine on his hairy ass, exposing his anus on his way to the nightstand. He grabs his phone and sits on the floor in front of the nightstand. While he is preparing payment, Jojo presents him with a business proposition. She tells him he has a place in the film industry and if she didn't walk into the room it would have ruined him. She promises to never release the photos on the condition that he throws more parties with industry executives willing to pay for our services. Christina interrupts Jojo's business deal and asks for more clarification on the word "our." Jojo's right hand grabs Christina's left hand, interlocking their fingers. Jojo notices the green in Christina's eyes as she reminds her she made $2,000 by spitting. She asks Christina if she felt empowered being in control. Before Christina could answer, their phone alerts go off. Jojo convincingly expresses to Christina that she needs her to be her right hand. Christina really can't see the blue in Jojo's eyes with her back being towards the window, but her touch felt sincere. Jojo turns her phone towards Christina, showing her the $4,000 deposit. Jojo asks Dan if they have a deal while she stares at Christina waiting on her answer. 3 seconds of awkward silence deafened the room before Jojo commands Dan to send Christina another $1,000 and offers her next service to be on the house. Christina gathers confidence in her tone and says she'll do it. Jojo lets go of Christina's hand and stands up. She reaches out her right hand to help Christina stand. Christina stands, and Jojo gives her phone to her, requesting her contact information. Jojo puts her shoe back on and picks up her duffel bag. Christina's phone alert goes off again. Jojo thanks Dan, who is sitting with his back against the nightstand with a satisfied blank stare. Christina inputs her number, hands Jojo back her phone, grabs her hand, and they leave the bedroom.
This episode of Bella Vita Tales of Sidori Island Part 1 is sponsored by...
Here's the plot. A serial killer's last victim survives and is rescued and treated by the best first responder team in the city. The victim is treated at the hospital by a world-renowned doctor who learns the victim has a rare disease. While the police force and FBI are searching for the serial killer, the hospital staff and doctor race to find a cure for the rare disease of the lone survivor of a serial killer. Suddenly, a terrorist plot on the hospital is uncovered and a special ops unit has to intervene before the hospital is destroyed, and the doctor never finds a cure for the lone survivor of the serial killer who the cops need as a witness to help find out who it is. That's their network series plots, not ours. You can clearly tell, over here we ain't them and they ain't us. Bella Vita Tales of Sidori Island Part 1 isn't just a story, it's an experience. And for those who want to take the potion and go deeper, to uncover the secrets behind the scenes, there's only one place to do it: Patreon. When you subscribe, you get ad-free early access to episodes, exclusive character details, and behind-the-scenes content that takes you inside the mind of the creator. Think of it as your all-access pass to the world of Bella Vita. Visit patreon.com/The Felix Network and join us. Because over here, We are something different.
Jojo is sitting in a back room across from a cashier at one of her many convenience stores. The room is filled with boxes of inventory, which leaves little separation between Jojo and the cashier. Outside the room waits Jojo's driver and private security. Jojo discloses to her employee that she hasn't heard the name Joanne St. in 25 years, and she was surprised she knew who she was prior to the stores. The employee nervously laughs and begins to reiterate her knowledge and history of Joanne St. Before the employee can finish her first sentence, Jojo cuts her off and says she wasn't surprised she knew exactly who she was because the truth is in the details. The employee looks at Jojo with a confused look as anxiety and nervousness ensue. The buzzing light flickers, air conditioning fan, and random noises of the back room become mute as she hears the name Dominique Taylor associated with D. Taylor, the blogger, come out of Jojo's mouth. Dominique's heart sank with anticipation of hearing she was fired in the next upcoming words. Jojo, noticing the distraught look on Dominique's face, she leans forward, places her right hand on Dominique's left knee, and assures her she isn't fired. Dominique releases a sigh of relief as the backroom noises once again raise their volume.
Jojo sits back up and immediately answers all of Dominique's internal questions on why a CEO of a company wants to talk to a 24-year-old cashier. Jojo explains she still has a close relationship with Dan, so she reads articles pertaining to him. She says she came across the phrase rage artist and was intrigued by the association between Dan and the phrase. Jojo reaches in a briefcase on the floor by her feet, grabs a stack of papers and hands them to Dominique. She tells her that the first paper is a detailed map of how she found out who D. Taylor was. The next sets of papers are a non-disclosure agreement and an affidavit. Dominique asks what all of the papers are for. Jojo crosses her right leg over her left. Only the backroom noises are audible as Dominique stares at Jojo's smooth legs with a majority of her right thigh and hamstring exposed due to Jojo's angled posture. Jojo takes off her glasses and looks Dominique in the eye and proceeds to tell her that she is much more than a cashier and asks if she understood the slogan of Shady Joe's. Dominique admits when she first heard the slogan, she thought Joe was a drug dealer. But after she learned that Joanne St. was the founder, she assumed it to be acting money. Jojo begins her rebuttal and Dominique cuts her off, stating she wasn't finished. Dominique continues and says that's when she went on a deep dive into learning more about the CEO. Dominique tells Jojo her research led back to Dan Hoff, which is why she started blogging about him. Jojo listens with a cold smirk on her face as she finishes Dominique's story. She insinuates that Dominique got a job at Shady Joe's to try to uncover Dan's involvement into her success after only doing one movie. And she was going to use the information to extort Dan. Dominique's palms are sweaty and her right leg begins to nervously bounce up and down. Jojo instructs her to sign the papers to receive all of the answers.
Jojo uncrosses her legs, reaches down in her briefcase, and hands Dominique a pen. Dominique can't help but to stare at Jojo's legs as she takes the pen and signs the papers. Jojo thanks Dominique, takes the papers, and places them back inside her briefcase. Dominique locks eyes onto Jojo's briefcase as she pulls out a tablet and hands it to her. The passcode is 3264633, Jojo discloses as Dominique types it in. Dominique's golden skin allowed her face to show red of embarrassment as she scrolls through the tablet. Jojo suggests that Dominique might try to use the excuse of searching for the origin of her name as she typed Dom into the spyweb search engine. Dominique begins to stutter and say she was only researching in reference to who Dan really is. Jojo accuses her of liking control and domination. Dominique instantly refutes Jojo's allegations. Jojo reaches her hand out asking for the tablet back from Dominique. Dominique hands her the tablet as Jojo opens a new tab with a video and fast forwards. Jojo hands the tablet back to Dominique and tells her to press play. Dominique presses play, and after 3 seconds, she stops the video as tears of embarrassment roll down her cheek. She alleges Jojo of trying to humiliate her. Jojo scoots her chair closer as she opens her legs so both of Dominique's legs are between hers. Dominique can see Jojo's blue-laced underwear as Jojo uses her sleeve to wipe the tears from Dominique's eyes.
Jojo expresses humiliation is not her intent. She explains that after she found out who was writing the blogs about Dan, she wanted to get as much information as she could about the person. Once she found out it was an employee, she knew she would be able to gain access to their search queries if they connected their device to the store's Wi-Fi. JoJo admits that once she saw Dominique, she became fascinated and would watch her on the cameras. Lastly, JoJo educates Dominique that she would get alerted anytime Dom or Femdom appeared in a search. And on the day of the video, she received an alert and decided to peek at the store's cameras. What she witnessed was Dominique on the maintenance closet floor with her hands squished inside of her form-fitting work khakis, halfway enjoying herself. JoJo confesses she was moved by Dominique getting turned on by women in power over men.
JoJo removes her tear-stained sleeve from Dominique's face as she leans back upright in her seat. With the feeling of embarrassment starting to subside, Dominique asks what she wants from her. JoJo tells her about when she was 19, the night of the award show. She talks about how she and Christina worked together for 6 years entertaining guests at Dan's industry parties. JoJo adds she has built an enterprise of strong, powerful, successful women who are in control of their own lives. JoJo let it be known to Dominique she was retiring and needed a successor and wanted it to be her. Dominique asks why her and what happened to Christina. JoJo reaches in her briefcase and grabs her phone. She opens the photo gallery and pulls up a picture of her and Christina. She hands her phone to Dominique. Dominique lets out a loud gasp and says no fucking way as she looks at the picture. With excitement in her voice, Dominique rhetorically acknowledges that Christina Larue, the famous model, was involved in Dan's rage parties. JoJo chuckles, admits she likes the name Dan's Rage Parties, and confirms Christina was with her the night of the awards show after party. She tells her all Christina wanted to do was to be a model, and after she made the right connections through the parties, she became exactly who she wanted to be. JoJo tells Dominique she has 2 reasons for choosing her to be her successor. The first reason was to protect Dan and the store brand. She explains how, if Dan's anonymity was exposed, it would destroy the whole existence of her company. She edifies Dan as being a decent guy who has a fetish, and he has never hurt her or any other women.
The second reason JoJo expresses to Dominique as she leans back into her awkward angle and crosses her legs. With conviction in her voice, JoJo insists Dominique is the future of the rage party industry. JoJo dives deeper as to reasons as to why she believes in her. JoJo begins with how attractive she thinks Dominique is, pointing out her natural full lips that complement her squinted eyes. Dominique employs all of her research was starting to make sense, stating she always hear about Joe and Chris events on the social media app Plugged. But she never put 2 and 2 together, meaning Joanne St. and Christina Larue. JoJo alludes to Dominique's name being perfect for the lifestyle. She asks Dominique if she can shorten her name to Dom, if she chooses to accept her offer to add a sense of mystery and anonymity. Dominique asks what happens if she doesn't accept and decides to blow the whistle. JoJo responds quickly with threatening to fire her for playing with her pussy at the store, which will become public record if she releases the information. JoJo advises her that the paperwork she signed protects both of their interests. JoJo taps the tablet resting on Dominique's lap and says, Dominique, success is built on relationships, and in that tablet is every relationship you'll need to be successful. Dominique grips the tablet with her left hand, sticks out her right hand towards JoJo and says, call her Dom.
On the next episode of Bella Vita.
If a company had an all-star team, Trevor Jackson and Rosemary Ortiz would be the captains. Trevor is the maintenance supervisor and Rosemary is a rising star housekeeper. They work at the Citadel Spa and Retreat, where they're tasked with making sure everything job-related is at its highest standard. The resort is expecting award-winning filmmaker Dan Hoff. He's hosting an exclusive event for those affiliated with his network. Many of the island's 1% will be in attendance. Unexpected friction between the 2 employees makes things a little harder than anticipated. Do they let their emotions get in their way of their success? Does Trevor rise to the occasion, allowing Rose to give it her all? Some say hard work pays off in the end, but in this case, it could cost them everything.